Well, normally I would totally, I think, agree with you that it should be customers first. But I would always talk about technology and customers, but better customers and technology in this order. Is I think it should be not customers serving technology, but technology serving customers.
Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our quest to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jan Wermuth, and joining me, as always, my co-hosts Scott Burleson and Jonathan Edwards. Today, we welcome Professor Dr. Frank Piller of the RWTH Aachen University. Dr. Piller, or Frank, is considered one of the leading German experts for innovation management, open innovation, customer co-creation, and product individualization. His research has received numerous awards, like the PDMA Co-Creation Award or the nomination for the Innovating Innovation Award from Harvard Business Review and McKinsey. He previously worked at the MIT Sloan School of Management before becoming a professor in Aachen, where he is now the head of chair of the Institute for Technology and Innovation Management. Frank habilitated in 2004 on open innovation and user innovation at the TUM Business School in Munich, where he headed the research group Customer-Driven Value Creation. That's, of course, something we're super interested in here. I got to know Frank and his work in more detail by going through the MicroMaster program at the RWTH on managing technology and innovation, how to deal with disruptive change, which I can only recommend. So as you can see, all of this screams for having him on the podcast, and not lastly because in that course he mentions his appreciation of jobs to be done, or that kind of thinking or an approach, which is something of a household philosophy here at the Product Quest podcast. So Frank, we deeply appreciate it that you take the time, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Perfect. So let's jump in. What immediately strikes me from reading your biography and looking at kind of the course of your work and your career is that there always seems to be technology and the customer in there. So there's a lot of things that are about manufacturing even. So there's mass individualization, product individualization, but there is always this kind of value creation, customer co-creation. So these kind of two things that, at least in my experience, are like two different worlds, or they are always in a kind of tension, at least in one way or another. And you seem to have navigated that very naturally, to have these two things in your life or in your work. So can you elaborate a little bit that? Is it even a tension for you? How do you see that?
Well, normally I would totally, I think, agree with you that it should be customers first. But I would always talk about technology and customers, but better customers and technology in this order. Is I think it should be not customers serving technology, but technology serving customers. This said, I think the predominant meaning of innovation is nowadays that we first have to really get latent customer needs and then develop a fitting technology. However, I also acknowledge there are some examples where it's really technology first. There are no great and very successful companies that really came up with a technology and later only but successfully were seeking the problem, that their technology is solving. So there's also this way, especially in entrepreneurship, but normally customers. But there's one, and this is really was mentioned by habilitation in 2004. And there I strongly try to distinguish between customers and users. And I'm trained somehow academically in a domain that we say, well, they are customers, but what really counts are users. And as a driver of innovation. And so I would say it's customer is nice, but I would personally always would take a user-centric perspective.
Okay. That's a very interesting point. I think a very relevant distinction as well. I completely see that. So the way I'm thinking about this is, for a long time I would have said the same thing. I would have said, well, customers first and then technology. But the reality is just that's on the one hand not true, and probably also not a very reasonable strategy to be that open. And very often technology. I mean, look at AI. That's clearly technology driven and enables a lot of innovations. So I completely.
Is it?
Okay.
Well, AI first is this, but when is AI adopted? It was adopted just very recently when ChatGPT came up. And why? GPT-3 or the language models were out there longer, but you had this rather complicated dashboard, and you really needed to have at least some basic intuitive knowledge to interact with this. With GPT, it was so easy to interact. And of course, some people just play around with OpenAI for the sake of testing it. But if you get a continuous user, then as it really serves you. As for in my case, it really helps me to write boring review letters much, much faster and easier. So it, or, also helps me with some publications. And so I would say AI actually is a good example that only as it got very accessible, that really average users could address it, they are adopting it for their personal problems, And of course, there are always if some novelty, but then even as a seek for novelty, the seek for curiosity, which is a very user-driven need while we interact with this technology. It's not a sustaining business value proposition, for a company that my users just interact with me, my corporate technology because of curiosity. But also there, that's a need. However, there's one important point, and I think you said this is where I got a little bit skeptical, and if we'll take a recent thing like sustainability, as we all really know we have to become more sustainable. But we also know that we often just, at least myself, I'm talking about, but still taking a plane and consuming stuff, which perhaps is not so sustainable. So there may be actually instances today where it's not customer first, but whatever, planet first or society first. And so this is where I recently got thinking a little bit. But with regard to technology and what companies normally are doing, I think on the long term, a technology and the company is only successful if it really serves open needs of users.
Okay, yeah. So I find that really, really interesting. Could you maybe also elaborate a bit more that distinction between customer and user? I mean, I don't know why, to be honest, but I naturally talk about customers, but I think there is an important distinction in there. Could you elaborate a bit on why that's key?
Yeah, so it goes back to Eric van Hippel from the MIT, who used to be my boss when I was there, a really great innovation scholar. And Eric was very particular in this as when he looked at the sources of innovation. And when we talk about customer-centric innovation, we'll often have this perspective, what Eric calls a manufacturer-driven paradigm, that a company is innovating on behalf of customers and users, and the company wants to profit by selling the innovation. However, a lot of us, probably of the listeners, perhaps even some of the three of you, have been user innovators, meaning we were innovating to solve our own problems. And this has been thought to be one of the dominating sources of innovation. This necessity is the mother of innovation. You have frustrated users that want to, that have an open need, and they are not waiting for manufacturing to solve it, but they get innovating by themselves. And this has been shown as one really of the biggest drivers in our innovation system, even if traditionally companies don't get it yet. They think we innovate on behalf of our customers and users. So this is where this distinction when we talk about the sources of innovation, is this distinction between users and customers originally comes from. But then if you look about from a lot of products now, take an automotive, take a car. A car, of course, you have a customer in a family who may buy it, and this may be influenced by the user, the daughter who really wants this particular color or this entertainment system, and so on. Yeah. But then this car is used by several people, and I think a lot of innovation actually in the automotive industry is to allow personalization of the car during the usage stage. Think of smart products, so they really allow us to really interact with customers, with products while we use them. While in customer is very much focusing on this traditional perspective of, the point of sale, the original needs, I have to, when I buy a product, but nowadays, because of technology, we have so many great opportunities, that we can adopt products, that we, change products, everything where we put the term smart in front of it. And there, I think usage and the usage stage and users are perhaps a better term.
Okay, so I see it broadens the perspective on who is actually a kind of a relevant stakeholder, or relevant, user of the product, and not just kind of the person paying the bills, if that's, or paying the check, whatever then the thing is.
Exactly. I think about it. And this is what I think you in this online class you mentioned in your kind introduction, we don't really emphasize this enough, I would say. But traditionally, we always thought that innovation is over when we launch a product. We access latent needs. Perhaps we have a technology-driven process. We create opportunities. We design, develop the products. We do the final concept text. We launch. And then traditionally, we think innovation is over and sales takes over. But again, for everything that has the object smart in front of it, just think of your cell phone. Probably you can't see it, but probably your most, your most popular app, your most, useful app was just invented after the hardware of your cell phone has been designed. And so we are now entering actually an innovation world where a lot of innovation is taking place during the usage stage. As someone takes data from a connected product and puts up, connected services. So really this emphasis on using a product is where we see now a lot of innovation. Going back to the automotive industry, there was this big cry out when BMW started to charge in South Korea users for having the heat seat. Everyone, when you wanted the heated seat, you had to pay $12. When you wanted to open the roof, $20. But they said, well, therefore you get the car much cheaper and you just pay what you use. So the more we come into this world of smart connected products, the more is actually innovation entering what we traditionally call the usage stage. And this demands also really different, approaches, how we interact with customers. And perhaps this basic ability where, when I looked in previous editions of your podcast, where this traditional success factor of really understanding latent customer needs, as we have to engineer it all in this hardware. This is changing a little bit, as we just have to put flexibility and adaptability in the hardware, as often, at least for myself, only after I use, for example, my cell phone for a couple of months, I really know what I want, and what it can do for me. And so also with this changing perspective, I think a lot of our old tools of innovation management have to be rethought.
One of the things, it was interesting and just sort of in preparing and reading a bit about your background and getting back into the concept of lead users. I remember hearing a lot about lead users, 15, 20 years ago. And I'll tell you one thing, as a qualitative interviewer, I found interesting, or I was always very interested in, what has a customer modified? Have they added a label? Have they, I used to do a lot of work in tractors. And so have they welded something? Have they added a trash can or a bucket, or what have they added? And I'll just give you one example. We were studying the job of digging graves, interesting job. And on the backhoe, they had welded essentially a level. And so that didn't come with the equipment. They had attached it on there. So when the bucket's moving, they could look at it and know if it was level. And so the environment becomes such a natural part of discussion. I just look at what they've changed and ask them about it. But my question, so I've personally witnessed the power of this. But my question for you is, this idea of lead user, it's almost something we don't hear about that much anymore. It seemed like it was really popular 15 years ago, and maybe Professor von Hippel was just a proponent of it. But any idea why we just, or is that just my perception, or what are your thoughts?
I would say it's a little bit perhaps your perception, but two things. First, I think you're totally right that this old perspective on lead users never got the attention that what we now empirically know the scope of the phenomena is. So now, since the OECD, big international institution, they own the world definition of innovation. As they publish this most famous handbook, the OECD handbook on measuring innovation, which was published 5 years ago in its 4th edition. After like every 10 years, they have a revision. In this 4th edition, the OECD officially acknowledged that a source of innovation are lead users. In terms in B2B, like in the tractor example, but also citizens. And so it's now official. And after the OECD made it part of the definition, all the national census offices had to measure lead user innovation, which they did. So the US Census Office, the Japanese, the German. And we really see that up to 30-40% of all innovation activity, now statistically proven, is lead user innovation. So the data is there. Still, I'm totally with you, Scott, that most companies really don't have a lead user practice yet, which is astonishing. If you go to MedTech, they have it. So in the MedTech sector, they know it's innovating nurses, innovating doctors, and not the average doctor, not your best customers, but doctors or nurses in extreme needs, at very high-end hospitals or in the army under difficult conditions, that they are the innovators. You have it in some, like in the agricultural sector. If you work with John Deere and Claas, they actually know this. They have these practices. If you go to Hilti for power tool. So, but these are few examples. In average, it's still what in academia we call the Schumpeterian view of innovation. Schumpeter, who was really that the entrepreneur is the innovator, the company is the innovator. However, I would say intuitively, more and more companies capture lead user innovation as there is this growing practice of using social media streams and just analyzing big data for innovation impulses. And actually, who is publishing in a forum about her needs and her solution about a problem? The lead user. And so with companies, and what I see in many companies now, that they reach out, that on top of qualitative interviews and customer surveys, many companies now have a practice to really, crawl social media streams for innovative impulses. And then very often they actually get access to lead user information, even if they are not aware of that, and not do this dedicated process. And that may be just final point of this with Eric von Hippel. He described the lead user method, but this was a very complicated method of projects at least costing $500,000. As we're looking for this needle in the haystack, as there are very few lead users. So, but with technology as a research tool and data-driven innovation, actually, it's much easier nowadays to get access to lead user information.
That's so interesting. I'll tell you, the question I always had when I used to read von Hippel's work. So you find a lead user and they've got something, they've added this level onto a bucket or whatever. And so, but then the question is like, well, how I feel like I'm stuck not knowing is that literally just one person's problem, or is it a massive? To me, I was always a bit stuck on understanding how big is problem, how much can I generalize it, or literally was it just for his individual situation?
Yeah, I always call it, so if you do it as a company, if you find this lead user information, I always say you have to do, is it a nerd or lead user test? And this is mean you always have to do traditional concept testing. There are a lot of nerds out there, and they create something specific only they want. The lead user, by definition, is foreshadowing general demand, and he or she would come up with something that the majority of the market wants later. So this is why I always say companies, if you do have a lead user practice, or if you use ethnography or, data mining to identify really new, solutions from the internet, don't implement it. Always do a traditional concept test with the majority of your 2 days customers that want to buy it, and so on. As it could be just a nerd that comes up with this, or a freak.
Right. So what would you say are the basic concepts of lead user innovation for people who might know less about it?
So the basic idea of lead users are that lead users are people that really innovate out of their own need, if they have an open problem. And all of us have problems, but often we are not incentivized enough to innovate. We wait until, a company is solving the stress. So first there's this open need, and there's a high incentive to solve it today. This is why we have many more lead users actually in business to business, in industrial markets, as there the incentive to solve your problem is bigger. A lot of process innovation is lead user innovation. If someone improves their own manufacturing processes, they do this to benefit from using the manufacturing process, not from selling the improved processes to others. Second, a lead user, and that was exactly Scott's points before, is foreshadow general demand. So it's not a very niche, very specific application that one person wants, or one user, but that really there's a general market will follow. And thirdly, lead users also have kind of solution skills, So I probably became a professor just talking about innovation, as I have two left hands, So my lead user abilities are really limited. Well, I can hire my students, to do prototypes and really solve the problem for me. But I would be actually a bad lead user, as I lack a lot of technical solution skills, So these are the three elements that a lead user needs. So incentive to innovate already, to solve your problem today. Secondly, being ahead of the market, and certainly having some solution skills. And only if this comes together, identifying a lead user is interesting for a company. What we also know is, for example, Jonathan, that a lot of lead users, they have something and still no company sees that this is relevant. But other users come to them and say, oh, this is really cool what you built. Can you do it for me? And so they become entrepreneurs. There's been a big study by the Kaufman Foundation, a big US-based, foundation fostering entrepreneurship. And they actually saw that startups that are being founded by lead users, we call them then user entrepreneurs, are 10 times more successful as startups that are founded out of the need as an entrepreneur had a technology and just thought, oh, someone probably will use it, but not he or she by themselves. So that's actually also a strong pattern in entrepreneurship, that lead users that are very ahead of the market, that no established companies sees this, is becoming active on their own. And a super great example for everyone listening is just go to the web and Google patient innovation. There's a huge website on patient innovations. And these are patients. And of course, if you're really sick with a specific, illness, you have a very high incentive to innovate. Or it's often not perhaps the patient, but it could be the relatives of the patients, but really people very close to this. And if you go to this website, you find thousands of super fascinating innovations that really came up often 10 years or so before there was a commercially, solution available by a big medtech company, pharmaceutical company. However, lead user innovations are not enough. As if you take the example of patient innovation, there are few patients that really innovate, but the majority of patients just want to consume. They don't want to really build their own, heart device or orthopedic device. And they also want something that's cheap, that their health insurance is paying, and so on. So therefore, there's really like a division of labor between lead users and manufacturers. And actually, one mandate of the academic community I am in that's really studying this lead user is that also policymakers should really support lead users in the innovation. It's really an interesting source for innovation, perhaps less than supporting established companies in creating, new needs and so on. But they should support established companies by transferring lead user innovations, manufacturing them cheaply and safely, and making them accessible for the majority of users.
I really like. I want to maybe push you a little bit on having a stance here. So it seems like maybe this is too simplistic, right? But traditionally we thought, okay, it's the company that innovates. There are some people within the company, experts or whoever, they kind of innovate on behalf of the customer. Then more and more these co-creation kind of things came in, and now you almost sounded sometimes here and there that you would flip the relationship. So it's actually it's the user that innovates kind of on behalf of the company, and they execute. Or is that too simplistic view?
So yes, no, it's totally correct. I would say actually it's the other way around. Before there were companies, there were only users. Think about that.
Okay,
we have companies, it's rather something new, like hundreds of years ago, people were really doing a lot of their own stuff, they couldn't outsource everything. That was just coming with the Industrial Revolution. So, but I would say yes, and it's really empirically proven. There's a lot of statistics that really shows that in many industries, a dominating pattern is that the original source of a radically new innovation, that's also important. What lead users normally do is something really novel. As this is where new need resides. Established manufacturers are much better in incremental innovation and cost, innovation for cost saving. And probably 95% of all development activities is incremental. So there's still a lot of room for manufacturers to innovate. But this functional novel, this radical innovation, it has been really shown they go back to lead users. And companies actually would profit from transferring this. And also society would profit, as lead users are bad manufacturers. Either they become entrepreneurs and manufacturers by themselves, but normally lead user innovation is not accessible, even if it would be useful for the majority of people. You mentioned a very interesting third term, co-creation. Yeah. And this is something in the middle. As the traditional idea is, we have lead user innovation, totally autonomous systems, and manufacturer innovation. Co-creation is somehow, for people like me, let's say I'm innovative, I have my needs, but I lack the lead user skills, or my costs are too high to really become an entrepreneur. Yeah, this is why I love to be a professor. However, now a company could really set up an ideation contest, a co-creation site, and I help people like me to work with a company that I could tell them my ideas and so on, but then they would transfer it into the technical solution. So I don't know if you discussed the double diamond model of design thinking in this podcast, a very established model in innovation management that says first you have the problem space. So you have a need, an opportunity, then you go out to ideate, find needs, then have a problem statement. That's really what you want. And then you have the solution space, meaning then you turn that need into a technical solution. A lead user goes both through the problem space and the solution space, as does a manufacturer that goes through the problem space by engaging, for example, in job to be done, in outcome-driven innovation and market research to understand the needs of its customers, and then goes in the solution space, where often is a real competence of companies on technical problem solving, ramping up manufacturing and so on. Co-creation is somehow a split of labor. This problem space is somehow outsourced to customers, and then in co-creation that it's not just customers and users are asked for their needs, but also for ideas how to address it, with specific tools. But then the solution space is in the hand again of the manufacturer. Okay. And so co-creation is somehow a company is setting up an initiative to get specific people with lead user characteristics. Let's call it like this. Not average customers, really important. You can't co-create with average customers. But you need customers, leading edge users, people with lead user characteristics, but which don't want from that to co-create with them.
So how can companies in practice do lead user innovation? How do you go about it? Is it about having people observing what's going on in the world and having a lot of information and doing some kind of detective work to see what's going on? Or do you organize events? So how do you go about doing this?
Yeah, everything is possible. And what you said actually this detective work was a traditional lead user method. And this was what I said earlier, a very expensive process as you were really going up literally around the world to identify the lead users. You could then you had to search for the lead users. An alternative could be co-creation, where the lead users find you as you host a hackathon, an ideation contest, an open workshop where you freely invite people, to self-select them as they're really incentivized to work with you. But certainly, what do you do, Jonathan, if you have a problem? You probably Google it. And what you then find, often not the customer side, but a user forum where perhaps users talk to each other. And this is a great thing what lead users do and gives us the way to a third opportunity to find them. Lead users don't want to benefit from selling their innovation, so they don't care in IP and intellectual property. So lead users nowadays very quickly go to a forum, to an internet site, to a Facebook group or whatever, LinkedIn group, and share both their problems and their solutions. The great case in every innovation in sports is a lead user innovation of more novel form of windsurfing, mountain biking. I'm here at the coast in Belgium, or this kite surfing. Now, these new forms, all these are lead user innovations. And all are really discussed in forums first. And this is also, like if you take kite surfing, this is an industry where really the users and the manufacturers are closely knit communities. And they really, they go to events, they host events, but especially as they go to the forums and see what users talk about. They share their designs. As again, they don't want to profit from selling it, but they're actually happy if a manufacturer steals this innovation and professionally produces it, hopefully acknowledging that it was Jonathan or Scott, who was the inventor, but they often don't want royalties. And this is also something what economists didn't understand in the first place. Why should someone share the innovation? Well, if my benefit is usage and not selling the innovation, actually IP is not important.
Yeah. I think in general, it's customers usually have, or users in general, they have an openness, especially to share their problems. But I'm very often more in contact with kind of the average user, and they are super interested in sharing their problems, because on the flip side is exactly what you mentioned. The flip side is I get a better product, and that's my benefit. That's what I really want. If the company, of course, does a good job at innovating, then in the end, but that's a different question.
And of course, if you take machinery, in business to business, that's probably more a collaboration. And then if you have very professional lead users, they nowadays also know about the value of their knowledge, like in material science and so on. In medicine, the same. But in general, it's exactly, John, as you just said, this I profit that someone does it for me in a professional way, and perhaps that gives me the first edition of the product for free.
So
would you distinguish?
Okay, go on.
Would you distinguish between crowdsourced innovation and co-creation? Are these two different things, or are they, in your mind, the same?
No, it's the same. So for me, crowdsourcing is a way for co-creation. Co-creation is more this way I co-create between a company and a user, and crowdsourcing is a way to identify users. As I, broadcast a problem, and then people that would like to contribute self-identify and then, join a website, whatever a workshop is. But crowdsourcing is a tool of co-creation.
Yeah. I think it's maybe here this question kind of fits. So we talk a lot about kind of integrating the user in one way or another in the innovation process, and I think that has become more and more. Well, that's my way of phrasing it. There's sometimes the tendency that becomes a buzzword, that we are all. I mean, which company on the planet isn't customer centric at the moment? I think there are very few that. I mean, most of them say they are customer centric. Whether they are or not, that's a different question, but at least that kind of language has kind of creeped in. How do you in general see this going? Are companies really on the large scale becoming more and more user focused? Is it more of a buzzword? What's the state kind of user centricity, if you like, from your view?
So on the wording, I totally agree with them. I think they all acknowledge it. If I, do a company training, many more people than like 5-10 years ago have heard, for example, about job to be done. So the basic idea, and it's in the lingo of a company. Are they actually doing it? Not so sure. As if you really look in the practice of innovation management. Of course, in every larger company, you find a pilot on crowdsourcing. You find a co-creation site. You find someone who very sophisticated did, went through an entire outcome-driven innovation process, for that. Is it a routine? No. I think the problem is that the routine of innovation in many companies is, I still believe my gut feeling as a product manager. We don't have time. Let's do a quick focus group, a quick concept test, and that's it. And this is actually one of the puzzles, and perhaps you guys also being much closer to practice as I have an answer to this. It's one of the really puzzles after now being a couple of years an innovation professor is, why is the state of practice of innovation management so low? They're really great methods. They're really great tools. Jonathan, you mentioned crowdsourcing. There's a lot of knowledge how to really conduct a crowdsourcing contest correctly. But if you see what's implemented in practice, it's often on a very low level of sophistication. And so, I would say everyone is talking about customer centricity, but then still is using only, badly organized focus groups. And I think that's a problem. And this is where we still have to really educate companies and get them in making it a routine and not just, routine, something that's really woven into their processes as are technical validation tests, and quality tests. They are interwoven in, I don't launch a product if I don't want through CE certification, and all these technical things. But I know a lot of companies that launch products that never went through a thorough need analysis and concept testing.
Yeah, I like your emphasis, and I want to stretch this on routine. So kind of turning this. So in my work, I've seen is there has been kind of shift now that we were talking about, as I realized this. So very at the very beginning when I started working in innovation, well, some 10 years ago now, is innovation was a one-off thing. You did a project, and then that was kind of fine for three or 4 years, and then suddenly we have to do innovation again, and then you would launch another project. And this is becoming more and more, but it's on a tiny scale, but still it's becoming more and more a continuous thing. And I feel like also kind of my client side has shifted, and probably that's a reflection of this. So it's more and more people, for example, from UX suddenly are UX or POs are driving innovation, and they doing it on a continuous basis. So I think that probably reflects this shift. I mean, it's still at a low scale, but I feel like that's very strongly where this is more kind of coming from. And I really like this emphasis on doing it continuously. I think that's the only way to go about this, in a sense.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Okay, well, there is a lot of questions, of course, still about user centricity and level of sophistication and so on, but let's leave that maybe for a moment. I just want to stretch this emphasis on continuous innovation and how you mentioned a couple of methods there that I think, at least in this room, resonate quite well. Let's bring another topic. I feel like we have to talk about, you mentioned it before, and we talked about AI a little bit before, and everybody who visits your LinkedIn profile, which I strongly encourage people to do, will immediately see work on AI. There is also a lot of you, there are a couple of avatars of you that you will find on the LinkedIn page. So not for anything else, then for that, it's worthwhile. So a lot of your recent work has been focused on AI, or at least of what I've seen some of your publications. And it was actually one of the publications that you did that sparked my interest again in your work, where you I think you were one of the first who published an academic paper, and the abstract was written by ChatGPT, if I remember correct, or at least by some kind of AI.
No, yes.
So walk us a little bit through this. I mean, it's quite recent. It's a couple of months ago, for me at least, that roller coaster started. So How has innovation started to creep? AI started to creep into innovation, and where do you see this going?
Yeah. So, well, yes and no, it just started. So we were super lucky to really publish the first, sophisticated paper in a good journal on just an exploration how ChatGPT, or we use GPT-3, with a different user interface at this time, can help you through the entire innovation process. I have a long-term interest in generative AI, and actually generative AI is out there since many, many years, more as a technical problem-solving tool, as part of CAT software and so on. And so I always had this interest. And then when I learned about these transformer language models, that's the AI technology, so to say, behind ChatGPT, I was very interested, as actually technical problem solving is, formulas and quants. But innovation is very much words, and it's language. Needs are language, concept statements are language, opportunities are language, and so on. Feedback is language. And so when I heard about this new technology of transformer models that can really process language in a totally novel way, I got very interested. And then I had this ambitious PhD student, Sebastian Bougary, who got us very early access to GPT-3. We were some of the first people in Germany to get a beta account. And then at the end of 2020, beginning 21, we were playing around with this. And I started to talk about it, but no one cared. People couldn't really imagine. It really demanded this press hype earlier that year, that everyone got about. But then we really played around and published that paper with this exploration, and actually was 1 year under review. The paper was ready at the beginning of 22. So really now more than 18 years ago. But luckily it was 1 year in review, as then we had perfect timing, as it was just published when there was the middle of the hype just starting. So, but actually what we showed in this paper, and what the fascinating thing for me was that all of the things you could do before. So for example, ChatGPT is perfectly in a semantic analysis of blog posts. But before, you hired a specified agency that was really, specialized in the semantic analysis of big bodies of text, like social media stream, and you were outsourcing it. Now you can do it by yourself without any data science training. Of course, there's an entire school of computer-aided creativity. This is really out there since 20 years, but you really needed experts trained in these programs to help you. Now, with a little bit of Googling on the best prompts, you can do it by yourself. So I think the really big breakthrough was Springer Nature, one of the big academic publishers, already in 2018 published a book as a hardcover, entirely written by an algorithm. The author name is Beta Whiter. If you go to Google Scholar, you find Whiter, Beta. So 28, the first hardcover book published by Springer, entirely written by an algorithm. But again, you needed to be a data scientist to program this. And I know that around the time my PhD students also started or stopped to read the papers, but to exploit topic models to really process 10,000s of things. But they had to be PhD students. They needed the supercomputer of the university to do it. Now you can do this all on yourself. And I think this is what really the novelty of ChatGPT and these language models, that it's so accessible to all of us, while a lot of the things were possible before. There's one novel thing, however, that's super fascinating for me, that these language models, they have something what in creativity we call association ability. They really have this ability of what we call creativity. It's an element of creativity. They really perfectly can combine two things not combined before, do something meaningful. And this was not possible before. And therefore, what I think is, on the one hand side, we can use this tool to automate a lot of activities very easily that were possible before, like processing large bodies of them. But second, and this is just, I would say, accessibility is a novel element here. Yeah. But secondly, we also now can use this tool as a creativity, as a brainstorming partner. And this is also how we should use them. And especially on a podcast, focused on customer insights, it's very important not to use ChatGPT to replace your market research. When Scott were talking about that he in former times went out to have qualitative, rich interviews, with customers, different perhaps lead users, average customers, you still need to do this. ChatGPT can't replace this. However, to create perhaps a better interview guideline, to get already some initial ideas of better questions, to really have an initial idea how a customer journey could look like, ChatGPT is a perfect partner, but it's a creativity tool. It's not a research tool to create something novel, Yeah. And it's good in summarizing text you give it. Okay, once you have hours and hours of transcribed interviews, ChatGPT is perfect again in summarizing this, and really helping you to make sense of this. And this is really what I think it's very complementary, but it's not a substitution to good practices of customer user-focused research.
I want to emphasize a couple of things there because I feel like that was really rich. So let me start maybe from the end. So the way I use, and I think that's very important to emphasize, the way I use ChatGPT, and I think it should be used or kind of reflects what you have been saying, is when I'm too lazy or when I have to improve something. So kind of when I know I have to think about it, but give me just something to start, then it's brilliant. It really helps you to kickstart your thoughts, but it shouldn't kind of replace it. Or when you already have something, how can I improve it? I use it a lot, especially about language. And I think that's a point I want to stress as well, that we have hit a couple of times now in the podcast, and that made me think that we should do something just maybe on this, but the connection between language and innovation. And I think that somehow seems to be the thread here also in AI. So the ability to play around with language, understand language, and that has a direct link, I think, to innovation itself, because as you rightly said, innovation is so much about language. It's about how you frame something, even can be almost like an innovation. You reframe a product and it's a different thing. So I really like this thread of language. There isn't really a question there because I really love what you've been developing, but maybe the thing I want to emphasize, because there is a lot of talk, at least in my user research kind of world, where there is even products now on the market there are a couple of guys that put together something like a synthetic user, where they kind of say, okay, you can tweak your persona. You can say, I want somebody that's 35 years old, that they drive a Mercedes, and I don't know, like to go on holiday to Spain. I don't know. And then kind of ChatGPT behaves as if it was that kind of customer.
It could. So we'll see. So I would say it's again great to expand your mind, and it's good, it can actually come up at the first place with persona, creates a persona, and then behave as if it would be the persona. And then you deploy, Midjourney to really make drawings of this. So, but again, it's the same like with lead user innovation. This is what you get from a lead user you shouldn't implement. The same as what ChatGPT is doing for you, you shouldn't implement. This may be something you take as an informed perspective, either to really implement, but okay, it's a little bit different. So it again depends on your, let's say, solution space. If there's Tucker Marion, a great colleague at Northeastern University in Boston, you may invite him to this podcast, and really invented the first entirely autonomous innovation system. So he has 3 algorithms. Algorithm number 1 calls big bodies of customer data for latent needs. So he claims he really discovered the first algorithm to identify latent needs out of big information. The second, he has a GAN who automatically creates out of these latent needs concept statements, so product descriptions, both technically and, on the value proposition. And then, that's what I find the most interesting, he has so much data about the market that he can replace the market research, the concept testing. He can predict the success of this in the market. However, now comes the big however. he more in the moment can do this for sports shoe. And sports shoes are totally stable market. For sports shoes, think about what is the innovation on sports shoe. There's very, very little. There are hundreds and thousands of new models launched, but they're more or less all the same, and some flops and not. So in this very constrained space, this system works perfectly, as he has a lot of training data from sneakerhead consumer forums. He had a lot of data on performance, as he knows on Amazon, all the websites you can purchase this data, how different models work. And there's a very clear language to describe a concept of a sports shoe. So for this, he really created an autonomous development system. And there I could say Nike or Puma just can push a button and they get new shoes out and they will be as successful as the previously ones. However, I don't see too many other markets where this would work. For other markets, so there may be these very constrained markets where this works. And but in others, I think you just get a concept, from what you said. You have a persona, take it as an inspiration to dig deeper into it, but it doesn't do the problem solving for you. You still have to do the solution space with all the technical solutions and so on. So I just see, like what you said earlier, these tools for most markets up to now with what's possible now, and perhaps something will be possible in 3 years, what we can't imagine today, with the pace of innovation in that field. But I think today it is perfect to be better in what we are doing already today, but it's not really replacing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. What was he called?
Taka Marion at Northeastern. So I will give you for your show notes a nice article which he published where he really describes the system. He has a startup called ADA, where they also now spin off this technology out of Northeastern University in Boston. And it's just fascinating. And they are now at the big test. Can they bring it to other market domains?
Okay.
So there's a paradox somehow at the heart of using these kinds of systems for innovation, which is that they are learning based on existing data. So we train them on existing knowledge, but the proposition is that from this existing knowledge we can derive something new. Where, in your opinion, does this newness come from if these systems are only based on things that are already existing?
Yeah, well, we could say, Jonathan, that's a pattern of most innovation, actually. And it's a good example in the patent offices. The US and the German patent office define an invention as something new to the world. The European Patent Office, that was founded later, defines an invention as the combination of existing knowledge in a way that's unobvious to an expert. So, but the combination of existing knowledge is an invention, really that you can get a patent on. And so this is, so I would say that's the character of most innovations and inventions, actually, that you combine existing knowledge in a novel way. And but I agree with you, and this is what I really thought when talking about Taka Marion's example. It is very good to do this incremental innovation, of the next sneaker combination. I wouldn't say there are these barefoot shoes, if I think, barefoot shoes, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know if their algorithm could come up with a barefoot shoe, It can perfectly come up as it learned about these very elaborated fashion sneakers like Prada is doing, with these big, like foam. It learned that. But the basic concept of a barefoot shoe, can it come with a new foaming technology, for the cushioning? No. And this is not part of this training data. Okay. However, there are other algorithms, and there's a great paper in Nature in the field of material science, where they actually trained an algorithm to come up with novel materials. So it really does the basic research to create out recipes, so to say, for novel materials. And these researchers put the algorithm in test towards the entire humankind by giving the algorithm only all the knowledge from 1900 until 1990, and then they had the last 20 years, what humans invented in the last 20 years as a benchmark. And actually they showed that their algorithm came up with algorithms with this knowledge up to 1990, immediately, that humans only came up 7 or 8 years later. So these algorithms were 7 to 8 years ahead of not just one human, but all the experts in that field in material science in inventing something that today is now in this class of materials seen as one of some of the breakthroughs. So this is possible today, but again, as these material inventions depend on recombining existing knowledge, and these algorithms now are amazingly good in finding open spaces, where is a field, where is an opportunity, and then recombine this knowledge. And then if you go to Toronto, to Azura Allensburg, Turek, or something, it's a complicated name, but he has a self-driving chemical lab. So he has an algorithm that defines new materials, and then a robotic lab that is entirely mixing this together, analyzing, no human involved. So this is there. This is no science fiction. This exists for technical problem solving, But what you need is still the human who provides the target. You still have the human who says, actually, I think there is a market for material, for coating with these, elements, with these characteristics that I would like to produce on this production equipment for so many, dollars for a ton, and so on. So you still need the problem, the need from humans. But then a lot actually of this technical problem solving process, especially in like material science, is very advanced. There are autonomous systems existing that really come up what I would say are really novel inventions.
Okay. Oh,
do you recall the name of the person who was doing these studies? The one.
Yeah, Alan Azura Putzak. He has a very complicated name, and I'm very bad with names. But if you Google or your thing is self-driving chemical lab in Toronto, you will find him immediately.
Okay. I had the image that immediately came to my mind. I think it's this Mickey Mouse episode where he kind of has these brooms that work for him, and then all of the whole chaos starts. But
it's
probably it's a bit more
no?
organized than that.
Yeah, but that's actually a big debate, and probably the next podcast for you. What's really the role of humans? As actually he, in his perspective, says the human, in his vision, only provides what we would call now the prompts, all it provides the question, and is observing the system, how it does technical problem solving, and from time to time is intervening, and actually the human realizes the question I gave to the system was wrong. The task was wrong. But all the rest is autonomously executed by this autonomous lab.
Someone put this to me last week or so, and I think it really hit, it resonated with me. I don't know if it's entirely true, but they said, like, up to now, we have always asked the question, how can technology improve us? How can we use a computer, for example, to improve us? And somehow this seems to be shifting, that now with all these more advanced AI things, suddenly the question comes up, well, what is there left that I can add? So as the humans, so I don't think this is entirely changing.
There's so much left. And just there's one point I also want to emphasize is, in the end, it's not just to come up with great products. It is about building a relationship with customers, having loyal customers. And all this AI can't replace. So perhaps we just have more time, to really care about our customers, service them, advise them, work with them. As you're not loyal to an AI, that created a product. You're loyal to a company, to a brand, to someone that really, solves your processes. And well, perhaps also at one time there's an avatar that is doing it, it replaces a social contact. But again, I hope humans still remain humans and love more humans than avatars.
There's this
at least for the majority.
Yeah.
There's this fantastic quote I stole from some former guests of ours, Ian Kerr and Jason Frasca, and it's from Henri Bergson, and it's a speculative problem is solved as soon as it is properly stated. And I thought that's a very interesting idea. So you were talking about just putting prompts, and that we as humans would be stating the problem, but actually stating a problem, if you really think about it, is not that easy. If you want to state a problem correctly, and this ties into this AI alignment problem, because specifically that is exactly the issue, is that you want to, well, if you have these super intelligent AIs, you want them to behave in a way that's beneficial to human beings. But to define what that means is actually not easy, and this is not a solved problem. And somehow I believe this is, we face a similar problem in this space of innovation. How do you actually define a problem in a way that you're not actually giving the solution?
Absolutely. And that is actually, I think we can learn a lot from the open innovation movement, as we had this crowdsourcing of technical processes, where actually stating a problem that others could solve it, really understand your problem very quickly, even if they came from different domain, was one of the main success factors. And perhaps this is similar also in this interaction. But you said another important point, and this is why I prefer in my papers about this AI and innovation to not just talk about AI, but something what we call hybrid intelligence. And this is really the combination of human and machine intelligence in a way that you really collaborate with each other. In former times, we had either humans classifying pictures, and then you had an algorithm, doing pattern recognition, or we had an algorithm doing a prediction, and then a human executing on this prediction or prescription. But the idea of this hybrid intelligence is really that you have a collaboration. This is why I also love ChatGPT and so much. If you play with the ChatGPT, you really have the feeling that you interact with it, or you give something, it learns from the context. And so I really there had this idea of collaboration with this machine. And that's exactly also what my vision is, how machine intelligence and humans work together is really with this hybrid intelligence. It's really like a collaboration. So we are doing in the moment large-scale experiments, how we can augment creativity sessions, brainstorming sessions with AI. And there it's also what we really see that the most productive sessions is if you have one human whom you team with an AI, it's much more productive than a lot of humans brainstorm with each other. We have a lot of group effects, actually Osborne's brainstorming of people together is not the most productive thing. But they're also much more effective than just brainstorming alone, as in they're biased. But making this in a meaningful way, where this really, you have this interaction, I think this is what leads us forward. And it could be also that an AI is really helping us to first formulate the problem in a better way, that we then actually feed to another AI for problem solving. Yeah. So as you said, Jonathan, formulating a problem is often the most difficult thing in a good way. So. And I think this is exactly, Jan, when you said you use ChatGPT to do a persona, I would say you really are in the problem space. You try to explore, to describe this persona, but it doesn't give you the technical solution of the product you launch in the market. It just gives you a better briefing, describes the problem at the end of the problem space before you go to the solution space.
Yeah. And Peter Thiel, of course, understood this very well with Palantir, because he was one of the first to have this idea of that humans with AI systems would be more powerful than just either one of them alone.
Exactly.
Very nice. So I want to kind of bring this. So I'm starting to miss more and more in this discussion. I'm starting to miss my university times, I realize. So how can you point us a little bit, how can innovators that are listening now, how can they kind of interact with either you or with the RWTH Aachen? And is there ways for companies to reach out? I think that's broadly known, but still, like how can they do that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So first, you mentioned we have these MicroMaster on edX, a big MOOC site, which is actually an entire innovation program entirely for free, 5 classes. However, I have to say, as it's really, these MOOCs are very traditional, so all the cool AI stuff is not in there, but for profound, education or more radical innovation, that's a good start. In Aachen, we have big international programs with a combination of management and engineering, some MME programs, and one dedicated to technology and innovation management. We have always like 50 entirely international students, that want to go out of engineering more in the innovation management side. Our executive MBA is based on that. But then I would say I'm very open and accessible, as I really learned that most of our great research programs started with clever questions from practitioners. And I love these emails. They say, Frank, I read your paper and I think it's total bullshit because of, and then we normally have an interesting conversation, or you can say it in a more polite way. So really feel free to reach out here. At Aachen, we have something where we are very proud of. We are probably one of the universities that's most closely aligned with industry. We have 450 companies have an R&D office on campus. So 450 companies have teams permanently on campus to innovate more for technical problem solving with my more the technical colleagues. So it's really a super great innovation ecosystem here. So I just can invite everyone, if you stop by in Aachen, it's a small town between Cologne and Brussels, just at the border between Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium, with a very long history. It used to be the heart of Europe with Charlemagne. But I just can invite everyone to stop by for coffee, visit our campus, and really see marvelous labs where we co-create with industry.
It seems like a place you might be able to find a good beer somewhere, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. And if you don't like the German one, Belgium is just 10 kilometers away.
Right.
Very nice. So a call for 2 different kinds of lead users there. If not for the innovation, then. All right. Well, Frank, thank you so much for taking the time and answering our question and providing your view. Is there anything else that you want to add? So I mentioned your LinkedIn profile. I think that's really also something to recommend. Anything else that you want to add, or let us know?
I think we had a really nice conversation. Thanks a lot on that. And I would say whatever you do in innovation, for me, really this basic, what I learned over the years, you have to be open, and this is somehow what I really see. You have people that are head of innovation management. I think, you are so close. You just stick to, the principles, you stick to the processes you learned, you're embedded just in your industry. So for me, the biggest success factor is to just have this open mind, and go out and reach out. And I think this is probably one of the missions of your podcast also, to increase the openness. And I think with this, just my last word, stay open and continue to innovate.
That's a perfect place to end it. So thank you so much. That concludes today's Product Quest podcast. So as always, send any comments or ideas for future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com, and see you next time. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. I loved it, Frank. Really great.
AI
Thank you.
self-discovery labs. Wow, that's crazy stuff.